Tonight, there is nothing you are required to do, and there is nothing you are expected to remember. This is not a story that builds toward an important moment, nor is it a narrative that depends on attention or effort. Instead, it is simply a slow and gentle presence designed to exist quietly in the background, much like the long, uneventful evenings that once defined daily life across the northern regions of Europe, particularly in places such as Sweden, where silence was common and time was rarely rushed. For many centuries, people living in these regions experienced days that were remarkably similar to one another. Change happened slowly, often so slowly that it went unnoticed. Seasons arrived as expected, routines repeated themselves without interruption, and most hours passed without anything memorable taking place. This was not considered unusual or undesirable. In fact, it was simply how life was understood. Predictability was normal, and excitement was rare. As you listen to this voice, there is no need to follow every sentence or hold on to each idea. The pace is intentionally unhurried, and the structure is deliberately simple. Much like the rhythms of traditional Scandinavian life, everything moves forward steadily, without urgency, without surprise, and without any particular destination. If your thoughts begin to drift away from the sound, that is perfectly acceptable. And if you lose track of what is being said, nothing important will be lost. In old Nordic communities, especially in rural Swedish villages, time was not measured by deadlines or schedules, but by light, weather, and repetition. People woke, worked, ate, and rested according to patterns that had been followed for generations. These patterns rarely changed, and when they did, the changes were small and gradual. The absence of constant stimulation allowed the mind to settle naturally, creating long stretches of calm that filled both the days and the nights. This recording follows that same philosophy. It does not seek to impress or entertain in the traditional sense. Instead, it mirrors the slow pace of a world where waiting was common, silence was familiar, and nothing demanded immediate attention. The words you hear are not meant to excite or engage deeply, but to gently occupy space, providing a steady and predictable sound that allows the body to relax and the mind to slow down. Throughout much of Scandinavian history, especially during the colder months, people spent long periods indoors, surrounded by stillness. Conversation was often minimal, and activity was limited to what was necessary. In these moments, quiet was not uncomfortable. It was simply part of the environment. The steady passage of time, marked by routine rather than events, became something people adapted to and eventually found reassuring. As this introduction continues, you may notice that nothing dramatic happens and nothing urgent is introduced. This is intentional. Just as Nordic life often unfolded without sudden changes, this narrative remains consistent and calm. Each sentence flows into the next without demanding reaction, allowing your awareness to remain soft and unfocused. You may choose to continue listening actively, or you may allow the sound to fade into the background, blending with your surroundings. There is no correct way to experience this moment. The only purpose is to remain comfortable and undisturbed as the voice continues at a steady pace, echoing the uneventful rhythms of a quieter time and place. In the following segments, the focus will remain on ordinary details, simple routines, and repetitive aspects of life that once filled countless hours across the Nordic world. These are not stories of heroes or conflicts, but gentle observations of how time passed when very little happened. For now, there is nothing more you need to do and nowhere you need to go as we slowly and calmly move forward. In a small Swedish village, long before artificial lights and modern schedules dictated the rhythm of daily life, mornings arrived gradually, not with sudden brightness, not with any sharp noise, not with a clear signal that night had ended, but instead as a slow and imperceptible change in the light that filtered through narrow, often uneven windows and settled gently across worn wooden floors and timber walls that had witnessed generations of quiet living. People rose in their own time, not because they were urged to, not because there was any pressing matter waiting outside the home, but because the natural unfolding of the day permitted it, and because habit, more than intention, dictated each movement. The act of waking was itself unhurried. Individuals often lingered for several moments in the half-darkness, allowing the mind and body to become aware of one another slowly, listening to the soft creaking of the house as wood contracted and expanded with the changing temperature, to the distant sound of the wind moving across frozen fields or through dense forests, to the faint noises of animals stirring in barns or nearby pastures. These sounds were familiar, expected, and entirely unremarkable. Nothing demanded attention, nothing required response, and nothing offered excitement. When finally a person moved, each action was deliberate and familiar, a product of repetition rather than conscious thought. Sitting up, placing feet on the cold, hard floor, stretching the limbs slightly, adjusting clothing that had been worn, mended, and layered in similar ways for countless mornings before. All these actions happened slowly, rhythmically, with the body almost guiding itself while the mind remained quiet. There was no rush, no urgency, no need to reach a destination within any particular span of time. Only the continuation of a pattern that had been repeated for years. Silence pervaded the house during these early hours. It was not considered empty or uncomfortable. On the contrary, silence was expected, accepted, and even valued. Few words were spoken, for the tasks that required speech were minimal, and the space between sounds allowed the mind to remain calm and undisturbed. Even when family members shared the same room, they moved in a kind of coordinated solitude, each aware of the others without acknowledging them directly, each performing tasks in harmony with the slow rhythm of life. Breakfast, if it occurred, was modest and functional. Bread, baked several days earlier, often accompanied by butter, preserved fish, or simple dairy, was consumed quietly, methodically, without conversation or distraction. Meals were not an event to be savored, but a routine to sustain the body for the work ahead. Eating slowly and deliberately, the villagers allowed themselves to be fully aware of each bite, the texture, the temperature, and the subtle flavors that had been preserved over time. The mind did not wander toward ambition or concern. It remained present only in this simple act, in the measured passage of the moment. As daylight increased, the village itself revealed gentle signs of awakening. Doors opened with soft creaks, footsteps pressed lightly against well-trodden paths. Smoke rose from chimneys in a steady, predictable column, curling lazily into the cold air. These signals were noticed without fanfare. They were ordinary, everyday phenomena, and therefore calming. There was no rush to begin the work of the day, no anxiety about what must come next. Each action blended seamlessly into the next, forming a continuous, flowing pattern of motion and quiet observation. Stepping outdoors, villagers adjusted to the temperature without haste or complaint. Cold air was expected, especially during the long winters, and clothing was layered pragmatically. Woolen garments over linen, simple footwear, hats or scarves as needed. Movement was deliberate, careful, and unhurried. Each step measured and familiar, tracing paths that had been worn over generations. These paths led to fields, barns, small workshops, or nearby forests. And each journey was undertaken with the awareness that nothing new would disrupt it. The same trees, the same buildings, the same stretches of land appeared every day, unchanging and reliable, providing a subtle sense of continuity that was quietly reassuring. The environment itself reinforced this slow rhythm. Snow might lay thickly in winter, masking the usual markers of distance and requiring slower navigation. Yet, it was accepted without comment. Rain might soften the paths, making them muddy and uneven, but work proceeded regardless. In measured steps, with calm attention to detail, seasons passed predictably. Light shifted gradually, and the days extended or shortened in accordance with nature rather than human invention. Nothing unexpected appeared to demand urgent action. By the time the sun had risen higher, the village moved in a quiet, measured harmony. Animals were tended, fields observed, tools checked and adjusted for later tasks. Work did not begin with excitement. It began with familiarity. The sounds of life flow, conversations, soft scraping of tools, the distant murmur of wind through the forest created a soothing background that was entirely consistent from day to day. There was reassurance in this predictability, in knowing that the day would unfold slowly and safely, with each moment following the last without surprise or sudden change. This slow and uneventful beginning was not dull to those who lived it. Rather, it was a necessary condition for a stable and calm existence. The absence of excitement, drama, or urgency allowed individuals to move through the morning with quiet confidence. There was nothing to disturb the mind, nothing to accelerate the heartbeat, nothing to demand focus beyond the simple, necessary tasks at hand. In these small, repetitive actions, people found a sense of control and a rhythm that carried them gently into the remainder of the day. Once the morning routines had been completed, the villagers slowly turned their attention toward the work that would occupy the majority of the day. Not work that demanded excitement, not work that required immediate attention or provoked anxiety, but work that was steady, predictable, and familiar, the kind that had been performed in much the same way for generations. Work that moved slowly, deliberately, and quietly, forming the rhythm that would define the hours to come. Each person knew their tasks intimately, having performed them countless times, and each movement was guided more by habit than by conscious thought. The body remembered while the mind remained calm and observant, allowing attention to drift gently from one action to the next. The labor itself was varied, yet restrained by simplicity. Fields were checked carefully, fences inspected and repaired with hands that knew the weight and texture of the wood. Intimately, animals were fed and observed, and tools were cleaned, sharpened, or adjusted, ensuring they would continue to function reliably. All of this work was measured, patient, and deliberate, rather than hurried or performed for speed. There was no need for rapid movement, for completing the work quickly did not grant reward, and slowing down did not create consequence. Each action existed within a continuum, flowing naturally into the next. As the day unfolded, slowly, predictably, and without interruption, conversation, when it occurred, was sparse and purposeful, limited to coordinating tasks or clarifying observations. Long stories, jokes, or debates were reserved for evenings or rare social gatherings. In this environment, silence was valued, providing space for thought, for calm, and for the mind to follow its own meandering path uninterrupted. As the wind whispered across fields and the trees creaked faintly in the distance. Individuals worked in quiet harmony with both the land and one another, sharing the space without encroaching upon it. Tools were used with care and precision. Hammers, sickles, wooden rakes, and knives were familiar, worn smooth by years of handling, each one suited perfectly to its function. Repairs were slow and deliberate. Imperfections were accepted, provided the tool remained functional. Attention to detail was measured and patient, guided by an understanding that slow, methodical work created stability, while rushing could lead to mistakes or accidents, disrupting the gentle rhythm of the day. Time passed without rigid measurement. Clocks were rare, and the day was marked by the sun's position, the shifting of shadows, or the body's own fatigue and alertness. Each hour bled into the next, forming a continuum in which one task naturally led to another, and one observation flowed into the next. The repetition of these cycles was not boring for those who lived them, but comforting, providing a steady cadence against which life could be measured quietly and reliably. By mid-morning, much of the work had assumed a rhythm that was both predictable and calming. Each step, each action, each glance at tools, animals, or fields reinforced a sense of continuity and stability. Villagers moved at a pace that was steady yet unhurried, eyes attentive but relaxed, hands performing the familiar motions without urgency or strain. The day progressed in a manner that allowed the mind to remain at ease, wandering gently from one task to another, without concern for completion or failure. For each task was part of a whole, each small act contributing to a larger, quietly maintained order. The environment outside continued to exert its subtle influence. Trees swayed lightly in the wind. The sun, when visible, cast slow-moving shadows across the landscape. Occasional birds called from the forest edge. Distant farm animals moved rhythmically, creating a barely noticeable soundtrack of life. None of these occurrences demanded immediate action, yet all contributed to the gentle pulse of the day, reinforcing the slow passage of time and the quiet reassurance that everything remained as it should. Even as noon approached, work remained steady, unhurried, and continuous. Fields, tools, animals, and buildings required constant but moderate attention. No one rushed, no one paused excessively, and all proceeded at a pace that preserved energy while maintaining consistency. There was no need for excitement, for progress was measured not in speed, but in reliability in the absence of problems. When tasks were completed successfully, without error, the day felt complete, calm, and predictable. By carefully observing each element of the day, villagers developed a deep, almost subconscious understanding of the passage of time. They recognized subtle changes in light, temperature, and sound, and adapted effortlessly. Patterns of work and rest became so ingrained that the day progressed naturally, without requiring conscious planning or deliberation. This methodical rhythm fostered tranquility, as the mind had no reason to rush or focus excessively. It was free to drift, to observe, and to exist quietly alongside the slow unfolding of events. In this way, the repeated, steady work of the villagers was not merely functional. It was a kind of meditation, a quiet engagement with the world that allowed both body and mind to remain calm. The slow, deliberate pace, combined with predictable routines and gentle environmental cues, created a sense of order and reassurance, a framework within which life could be lived without urgency, excitement, or disturbance. Each day passed almost identically to the last, yet in that repetition, there was a quiet comfort, a slow rhythm that carried villagers safely and calmly through their hours. By the time the sun had reached a gentle height in the sky, villagers had moved fully into the tasks that would define the central hours of the day. Work that was neither hurried nor dramatic, but steady, rhythmic, and deliberate. The kind of labor that allowed the body to move in familiar patterns while the mind wandered freely through calm observations and quiet reflection. Some walked slowly across fields, inspecting crops or checking fences. Others remained near the barns, attending to livestock with careful, practiced movements. Every action, however small, was performed with attention, yet without haste. The rhythm was natural, continuous, and entirely predictable. The pace of work encouraged a certain harmony between individuals and their environment. The wind whispered across the landscape, carrying the faint scent of earth and hay. Birds moved from tree to tree in gentle arcs, calling softly. Distant farm animals shifted and stirred with quiet consistency. Each sound, each movement was minor and unremarkable. Yet collectively, they composed an understated soundtrack to the unfolding day. A soundtrack that was neither intrusive nor attention-grabbing, but that reinforced the sense of steady passage of time and persistent continuity. Tasks themselves were approached with a calm deliberateness. Hands knew what to do before the mind intervened. Tools were selected with care, worn from repeated use, and handled slowly to maintain function over speed. Fields were walked carefully, furrows inspected and repaired as necessary. Barns were checked for signs of animal discomfort or damage. Water containers were replenished, feeds distributed methodically. There was no rush, for rushing served no purpose. There was no impatience, for the day's work would expand and contract as it had always done, and all tasks would be completed naturally as part of a continuum. Observation became a quiet companion throughout these hours. Villagers noted subtle variations in weather, in light, in the movement of leaves and grass. Even minor changes in the behavior of animals were recorded subconsciously, guiding the next action without conscious thought. This attention to small details, performed in a calm and measured way, reinforced a sense of order and reliability. It created a space in which the mind could remain unhurried, drifting along with the pace of life without concern for interruption or disorder. Lunch, when it occurred, was approached with the same steady mindfulness. Meals were simple and functional. Bread, preserved meats, small amounts of cheese, and water or milk provided necessary sustenance without distraction. Eating was done slowly, deliberately, in measured bites, often without conversation. The focus was on nourishment, on maintaining the rhythm of energy and attention required for the work to follow. Once the meal was finished, cleaning and resetting occurred methodically. Each movement precise, practiced, and calm. Throughout these hours, the sunlight shifted imperceptibly, its movement marking the passage of time more subtly than any clock could. Shadows lengthened and shortened gradually. The warmth on the skin waxed and waned. The temperature rose and fell gently. Villagers did not notice these changes with urgency, but rather observed them as natural cues that guided posture, movement, and engagement with the work at hand. The environment dictated a pace that was neither forced nor accelerated, but gentle, measured, and entirely predictable. By mid-afternoon, a sense of continuity and calm persisted throughout the village. Work continued at the same deliberate pace. Footsteps across fields, hands handling tools, animals grazing or resting all maintained a consistent rhythm. Silence was predominant, broken only by necessary communication or the occasional sound of nature. The passage of time remained subtle and almost imperceptible, allowing individuals to exist fully within the present moment, neither hurried by past obligations nor distracted by future concerns. Even the simplest observations were absorbed with care. A leaf falling from a tree, a soft shift of light across a field, the distant call of a birdle were registered without excitement or urgency, becoming part of a quiet meditation on the natural order of life. Tasks, surroundings, and body movements blended together seamlessly, creating a steady and unbroken chain of calm activity, one moment leading gently into the next. As the afternoon deepened, energy levels and attention followed predictable cycles. Tasks that required less exertion were approached with slightly slower movements. More demanding activities were interspersed carefully to avoid fatigue. The balance between work, rest, and observation created an understated yet effective framework for maintaining both productivity and calm, ensuring that each hour passed steadily, without rush, without interruption, and without stress. The afternoon slowly deepened, and the sunlight began its gradual descent, casting softer, warmer light across the village and surrounding fields. Shadows stretched lazily over fences, barns, and the winding path that had been traversed countless times throughout the day. Villagers continued their work at a measured, deliberate pace. Hands moved with practiced familiarity, eyes observed without urgency. And every step, every gesture, every glance contributed to the steady rhythm that had defined the day since early morning. There was no rush, no sudden motion, only the calm, continuous flow of life unfolding naturally. Animals were tended with quiet attention. Livestock moved slowly, following familiar routines, grazing or resting as the villagers approached to feed, clean, or check them. Each action was performed with care, ensuring comfort and stability without the need for hurry. Tools were maintained methodically, fences inspected and repaired with deliberate precision. Small adjustments to buildings, fields, or pathways were made calmly and thoughtfully. Every movement reinforced the continuity of the day. Each task, a link in the ongoing rhythm that carried through the afternoon hours. Observation of the environment remained subtle yet constant. Leaves swayed gently in the wind. Distant trees shifted slightly with the breeze, and birds called intermittently from forest edges. These small occurrences were noted quietly, without distraction or urgency, incorporated seamlessly into the flow of daily life. The mind wandered gently, noticing patterns of light, sound, and movement, allowing attention to drift peacefully across the surrounding world. Time passed slowly and predictably, measured by subtle cues rather than clocks or schedules. Even the simplest tasks carried significance within this rhythm. Replenishing water, adjusting feet, tidying tools, or brushing hay from the barn floorage action was executed with deliberate care, neither hurried nor overlooked. Pauses were taken consciously, breaths drawn, hands rested, posture adjusted dull as part of a quiet meditation on the day's continuity. Each gesture and observation reinforced a calm, steady presence in the environment, establishing a sense of safety, predictability, and gentle order. By late afternoon, work had settled into a gentle, continuous cadence. Tasks flowed naturally from one to the next. Observation and movement were intertwined. Repetition became comforting rather than monotonous. The villagers' awareness of sunlight, wind, and animal behavior guided their motions subtly, without urgency, maintaining harmony with the natural rhythms of the day. Each task, each glance, each minor adjustment contributed to the unbroken chain of calm productivity that defined the village life. As the day progressed toward evening, energy and attention followed predictable cycles. Actions that required less exertion were performed more slowly. More demanding tasks were distributed carefully to prevent fatigue. Pauses were respected and integrated into the rhythm of labor. Every movement was deliberate, each observation absorbed fully, and every small task contributed to the overarching calm of the day. This measured, unhurried approach ensured both the mind and body remained regulated, steady, and comfortable. The sunlight softened further, long shadows stretched across familiar paths, and the village exhaled slowly with the rhythm of life. Animals returned to their resting places. The wind moved gently through trees, and distant sounds of water or birds continued in quiet harmony. Villagers moved with deliberate care, finishing the last tasks of the day with calm precision, integrating observation and action seamlessly. Each gesture, glance, and movement reinforced the sense of continuity, creating a meditative environment that allowed time to pass naturally, without disruption, without urgency, without notice. By the end of the day, all primary work had been completed. Yet, the rhythm of life persisted in subtle, quiet ways. Tools arranged, animals settled, paths walked once more, light fading slowly across roofs and fields. The villagers' bodies were relaxed, minds at ease, and the environment held a gentle constancy that would carry them into evening and night. The day had progressed in steady, deliberate patterns, unhurried and continuous, forming a calm, predictable, and reassuring flow. Every small task, observation, and motion contributed to a sense of order, stability, and peace, allowing the village to exist in quiet harmony until the approach of twilight and the eventual stillness of night. The light arriving slowly through narrow, frost-laden windows, spilling softly across wooden floors that had absorbed generations of daily life. The subtle shift in light, the faint creak of timber settling, and the distant murmur of wind across fields and forests. Feet met the cold floor softly. Hands moved to adjust garments. Eyes wandered briefly to familiar objects, noting the unchanged patterns of life before stepping into the day's tasks. Breakfast if taken at this hour, was approached with the same deliberate calm. Simple food bread, preserved from previous days, butter, dairy, or salted fish was consumed slowly. Each bite measured and intentional. Outside, the village stirred with understated motion. Tasks began in the same slow, measured fashion. Animals were fed and observed. Fields inspected, fences checked, tools cleaned or adjusted. The mind, free from urgency, drifted gently through observation and reflection, noticing subtleties in the environment, the texture of wood, the softness of hay, the quiet patterns of wind and light. The body followed, performing work with practiced ease, each repetition reinforcing calm continuity rather than haste or excitement. Hands repaired, adjusted, or maintained tools with care. Movements across fields were slow, steps measured. Every glance, every adjustment was made in alignment with a steady unfolding of the day. Tasks were repeated as necessary, yet repetition was soothing rather than monotonous. Familiarity created tranquility, a steady rhythm in which mind and body could coexist comfortably with the passage. The sun's light enhanced subtle textures, frost melting on roof edges, dew shimmering on grass, shadows stretching over paths and barns. The day's rhythm was steady, predictable, and unhurried, providing a soothing framework for mind and body alike. Time passed imperceptibly, yet fully, marking the hours without alarm, fanfare, or urgency. Shadows shifted slowly, temperatures rose gradually, and the faint sounds of life birds, wind, distant animals continued to accompany labor without intrusion. Every action, every observation, every pause, every careful step reinforced the gentle, persistent rhythm of the day. Work and rest, observation and motion were integrated seamlessly into a continuous, unbroken flow of calm, measured life, allowing the mind to remain at ease, the body to maintain a regulated pace, and the village to progress in quiet, deliberate harmony. The afternoon drifted slowly across the village, the sunlight softening as it moved toward the horizon, casting gentle, elongated shadows over fields, barns, and the winding paths that had been walked countless times before. Villagers moved with deliberate care, each action measured and familiar. The rhythm of labor flowing naturally from one task to the next. Hands moved with practiced precision, tending animals, inspecting fences, adjusting tools, or observing small changes in the environment. Each motion was slow, deliberate, and consistent, reinforcing a gentle continuity that carried through the hours without urgency or distraction. Animals were observed quietly, their subtle behaviors noted with calm attention. Cows shifted weight slowly as they grazed. Hens wandered carefully across the yard. Horses moved with measured steps in their stalls. Their presence acknowledged with quiet care rather than abrupt intervention. Feeding, cleaning, and grooming occurred with calm, deliberate motions. Tools were maintained and arranged thoughtfully to support ongoing work. Each small task, repeated many times before, became part of a continuous meditative rhythm, integrating body, mind, and environment seamlessly into the flow of the day. The village itself exhaled softly, a living landscape of subtle motion and sound. Wind whispered across fields, rustling the tops of grasses and trees. Distant birds called intermittently, their voices sparse, unhurried, and blending naturally into the ambient quiet. Streams shifted gently across rocks and banks, adding a soft, rhythmic accompaniment to the measured work of the villagers. Light shifted gradually, warm and diffused, marking time subtly without the need for mechanical clocks. These natural cues guided movement, influencing pace, attention, and posture in small, imperceptible ways. Reinforcing calm and continuity without conscious awareness. Tasks themselves were approached with patience, care, and deliberate attention. Fences were reinforced slowly, boards tapped into place with gentle precision. Animals were observed and tended. Fields were walked, soil inspected, and plants assessed methodically. No motion was abrupt. No action was rushed. Each task existed within the continuity of the day, contributing to a seamless rhythm that allowed the mind to wander gently through observation and reflection. Even repetition became a source of calm, each familiar movement reaffirming stability and quiet order. Conversation, when necessary, was minimal, deliberate, and slow. Words were functional and quiet, providing information about tasks, animals, or environmental changes without distraction. Long discussions, laughter, or abrupt noises were absent, leaving space for awareness and attention to the subtle shifts in light, temperature, or animal behavior. Silence, in this context, was not emptiness. It was a framework in which the rhythm of labor, observation, Every gesture was deliberate, every glance intentional, every movement slow, purposeful, and fully connected to the ongoing cadence of the day. Pauses were respected. Reflection occurred naturally, and the continuous observation of subtle changes reinforced the calm, meditative quality of life in the village. Even as labor continued, minor tasks were performed with focused care. The sun's warmth diminished gradually. Shadows grew longer, and subtle variations in temperature were noted and accommodated in clothing, movement, and activity. Tasks were sequenced carefully, with more demanding actions spaced evenly between simpler, repetitive motions. Pauses were fully integrated into the workflow. Observation continued, guiding attention without urgency. This structure maintained balance, prevented fatigue, and reinforced a tranquil, consistent cadence that carried through the remainder of the afternoon hours. The rhythm of work, observation, and gentle movement continued uninterrupted, a slow, steady pulse connecting villagers, animals, and environment into a seamless, calming pattern. Each moment flowed naturally into the next, with no abrupt transition, no rush, and no tension. Every minor gesture, glance, and adjustment contributed to the meditative cadence, reinforcing stability, calm, and presence. Time passed slowly, measured by habitual motion, observation, and awareness of the subtle shifts of light, sound, and movement in the surrounding landscape. The late afternoon moved slowly, the sunlight softening as it fell over the village and the surrounding fields, stretching long, gentle shadows across fences, barns, and winding paths that had been walked countless times before. Villagers continued their work with careful attention, each movement deliberate and familiar, forming a rhythm that had persisted from the morning through the early afternoon. Hands moved with practiced precision, tending animals, adjusting tools, sweeping barn floors, and completing small repairs, each action flowing naturally into the next. The rhythm was meditative, continuous, and unhurried, blending labor, observation, and awareness into a single, steady cadence that filled the village with calm motion. Animals were tended with quiet care, their subtle movements guiding the villagers' actions. Cows grazed, slowly shifting weight from one hoof to another with measured grace. Hens wandered deliberately across the yard, pecking softly at the soil. Horses shifted gently in their stalls, their presence acknowledged with careful attention rather than abrupt intervention. Feeding, grooming, and cleaning were executed with calm precision, each gesture integrated into the continuous pattern of the day. Tools were cleaned, sharpened, and arranged thoughtfully to support ongoing work, while small adjustments to fences, barns, and equipment were made without haste. Every repeated motion contributed to the meditative continuity of life, reinforcing stability, comfort, and quiet order. The village itself was alive in subtle ways. The wind whispered across fields, rustling grasses and leaves in soft, continuous murmurs. Birds moved quietly between branches, calling sparingly, their voices blending with the distant murmur of water in the stream. Light shifted imperceptibly, highlighting textures and colors across surfaces, guiding the villagers' perception and subtly influencing the pace of labor. Each environmental cue was absorbed without urgency, integrated seamlessly into awareness, and informed gentle adjustments in movement, posture, and task execution. The day unfolded slowly, deliberately, in a natural rhythm that allowed both body and mind to coexist with the flow of life. Tasks were approached with patience and careful attention. Fences were inspected and repaired with slow, precise motions. Animals were checked for subtle signs of discomfort or fatigue. Fields were walked, soil inspected, and plants observed methodically. No movement was abrupt, no action rushed. Each task existed in continuity with the next, forming a seamless flow of activity. Repetition provided comfort rather than monotony, and familiarity was reassuring, creating a meditative cadence in which body and mind moved together in harmony with the environment. Even small actions, adjusting a plank, moving hay, replenishing water, were performed with mindfulness, reinforcing the steady flow of life. Conversation was minimal, soft, and functional. Words were spoken only to provide information regarding tasks, animals, or environmental changes without distraction or interruption. Long discussions, laughter, or sudden noises were absent, leaving space for observation and gentle awareness to dominate the afternoon. Silence framed the villagers' actions and thoughts, supporting the meditative rhythm in which labor, observation, and reflection coexisted. The flow of activity became both grounding and soothing, establishing a continuous sense of calm, focus, and presence. Movement and observation were intertwined as the afternoon progressed. Hands repaired, adjusted, and organized. Eyes noticed subtle shifts in light, temperature, and sound. Bodies moved with calm precision. Even the smallest tasks, brushing the barn floor, checking feed, moving water, were executed with careful attention, contributing to the ongoing rhythm of the day. Pauses were taken deliberately, allowing moments of reflection, rest, and absorption of environmental cues. Each small gesture reinforced the ongoing cadence, creating stability and tranquility throughout the village and connecting villagers, animals, and surroundings into a seamless, calming pattern. Environmental cues guided the villagers naturally. Shadows shifted slowly. The breeze moved leaves and grasses, and distant sounds of animals or water provided a quiet, continuous feedback. Birds moved between branches with deliberate care, occasionally calling. The sun softened further, casting warm, diffused light across buildings, paths, and fields. Each observation informed the next action, allowing the villagers to move naturally, maintaining a measured pace without urgency. Tasks and attention blended effortlessly into the meditative flow of the afternoon, creating a rhythm that was predictable yet dynamic, continuous yet unobtrusive. By mid-afternoon, the rhythm of observation and labor had become seamless. Tasks transitioned smoothly from one to the next. Eyes remained alert but relaxed. Hands moved efficiently, and repetition comforted rather than bored. Pauses were natural, allowing energy and attention to be regulated, while environmental awareness persisted continuously. Small motions, adjustments, and gestures contributed to the steady cadence of the day, reinforcing the quiet, deliberate flow that governed village life. Every glance, breath, and step blended into a persistent sense of stability, calm, and continuity. Minor, repetitive tasks became opportunities for meditation. Brushing floors, checking animals, adjusting fences, or moving tools were all performed with mindfulness, patience, and awareness. Pauses were intentional, breaths were drawn, posture adjusted, and subtle observations incorporated into subsequent actions. Each gesture reinforced the rhythm of life, forming a continuous flow in which body, mind, and environment moved harmoniously. Time passed slowly, yet completely, measured by habitual motion, keen observation, and steady attention to both task and surroundings. As the late afternoon approached, movements remained unhurried and deliberate. Light continued to soften, shadows lengthened, and the air cooled subtly, guiding adjustments in clothing, posture, and task selection. Tasks requiring greater exertion were spaced evenly between simpler, repetitive ones, and pauses were naturally integrated into the workflow. Attention remained active but calm, responding to environmental cues without urgency. The flow of work, observation, and quiet reflection created a seamless pattern in which the villagers moved naturally, consistently, and with gentle purpose. Even as minor tasks concluded, the flow of observation and movement persisted. Cleaning, organizing, tending animals, and making small adjustments continued at a steady, measured pace. Environmental shifts, light wind, sounds, subtle movements of animals were absorbed without effort, guiding gentle modifications in attention and motion. The interplay of labor, observation, and rest formed a calming framework in which villagers experienced presence, continuity, and stability. Each gesture, glance, and step contributed to the meditative rhythm, allowing the village to exist fully in the moment while maintaining the natural cadence of life. Evening approached with a soft descent of light. Shadows grew long. The warmth of the sun faded gradually, and the air carried a cooler, calmer feel across fields and rooftops. Villagers continued their work, careful motions, completing final tasks for the day. Observations remained constant, subtly influencing the pace and precision of action, while the natural rhythms of light, sound, and wind guided every motion. The quiet flow of labor, reflection, and attention continued uninterrupted, reinforcing the meditative cadence that had defined the day from morning to afternoon. Time moved gently, steadily, with no rush or abruptness, measured only by habitual movement, observation, and calm awareness. The evening settled over the village, slowly, the sun dipping closer to the horizon, casting long, soft shadows across fields, barns, and winding paths. The light became warmer, gentler, and diffused, highlighting familiar surfaces with golden hues that softened the outlines of buildings and fences. Villagers moved with deliberate care, each action flowing naturally into the next, maintaining the rhythm established throughout the day. Hands tended animals, adjusted tools, swept barn floors, and repaired fences with practiced precision. The continuity of motion forming a meditative cadence that filled the village with calm and steady energy. Animals responded to the slowing pace of the day with predictable grace. Cows shifted weight slowly as they grazed, their movements unhurried, each step deliberate and soft. Hens wandered across the yard methodically. Feeding, grooming, and cleaning were conducted with attention and care, each motion integrated seamlessly into the overarching rhythm. Even the smallest, repeated gestures, adjusting hay, replenishing water, checking feed, contributed to the continuous flow, reinforcing calm and presence in both the villagers and the environment. The village seemed to breathe alongside the natural world, as wind whispered through leaves and grasses, carrying subtle, soft sounds from distant trees, streams, and hills. Birds moved quietly among branches, their calls sparse and gentle, blending into the ambient quiet. Streams shifted over stones, producing faint, rhythmic murmurs, adding a serene background to the measured labor and observation. Light shifted imperceptibly, illuminating textures, contours, and colors across surfaces, offering visual cues that guided posture, movement, and attention. Observation was constant but unobtrusive, absorbed effortlessly into the rhythm of life. Tasks continued with deliberate, measured attention. Fences were checked and adjusted. Animals inspected. Barns swept and maintained. Tools cleaned and arranged thoughtfully. Each action flowed naturally from the last, forming a seamless continuum of labor and observation. Repetition brought comfort rather than monotony, reinforcing familiarity, patience, and presence. Small adjustments, straightening a post, moving a trough, shifting hay were performed mindfully, integrating fully into the meditative cadence of the evening. Every gesture was purposeful, steady, and reinforcing the quiet rhythm that carried the village toward nightfall. Communication remained minimal, soft, and functional. Words were spoken only when necessary, providing guidance about animals, tasks, or changes in the environment. Silence framed action, supporting observation and reflection, and enhancing the meditative flow of labor and movement. The village existed in a state of gentle continuity, each task, glance, and breath contributing to the steady, unbroken rhythm that defined this quiet Nordic life. Environmental cues guided attention and motion. The sway of tree branches, the rustle of leaves, the soft murmur of distant animals, the shift of light across surfaces. Even the most ordinary tasks, repeated many times over, became meditative, reinforcing the sense of stability and calm. As evening progressed, the rhythm of work and observation achieved a seamless, continuous flow. Hands moved efficiently, yet deliberately. Eyes scanned animals, fields, and structures with attentive calm. Repetition became comforting. Small pauses were incorporated naturally, allowing reflection and rest. The villagers' awareness was continuous, yet gentle, integrating changes in light, temperature. Each minor gesture contributed to the ongoing cadence, forming a smooth, meditative pulse that connected the villagers, animals, and surroundings into a unified, calming pattern. Twilight deepened gradually, softening the landscape with muted tones. Shadows lengthened, air cooled, and distant sounds faded into subtle background murmurs. Villagers continued their labor, completing small, routine tasks in deliberate, mindful motions. Observation remained constant, with environmental cues guiding the pace and quality of actions. Tools were cleaned, animals tended, pathways swept, and barns maintained. Even the smallest tasks were performed with care. Adjusting hay, moving water, replenishing feed, or straightening tools were done with intention, aligning the villagers' attention with the gentle flow of the day. Pauses were integrated seamlessly into movement, allowing for rest, reflection, and absorption of subtle environmental changes. The villagers move naturally, in harmony with light, sound, and wind, their actions synchronized with the pace of the evening. Time passed slowly, measured by habitual motion, observation, and steady, deliberate attention. As the sun neared the horizon, the village exhaled a quiet, continuous rhythm. Villagers completed their work with careful attention, mindful of both comfort and precision. Observation guided action without urgency, creating a seamless interaction between labor, reflection, and environment. The flow of life remained uninterrupted. Minor adjustments to barns, fences, and tools were performed with deliberate care, reinforcing continuity. Animals settled into resting places or grazing areas, moving with slow, predictable motions. The interconnected rhythm of villagers, animals, and landscape continued, unbroken, steady, and calming. The passage into evening was gradual, uninterrupted, and harmonious, each moment flowing naturally into the next, without tension or abruptness. Even as tasks concluded, the meditative cadence remained. Villagers walked slowly along familiar paths, checking fences or barns, observing animals, or tending small tasks with careful attention. Each motion, each gesture, each glance reinforced the continuous rhythm of the village, maintaining stability, focus, and calm. The soft interplay of light, sound, and motion-guided awareness, allowing both mind and body to remain present yet relaxed. The evening stretched onward in a gentle, continuous flow, unhurried and unbroken, merging labor, observation, and reflection into a single, cohesive pulse of life. By the time night was approaching, the village had achieved a steady equilibrium. Actions were complete, observations maintained, and subtle environmental cues continued to guide attention naturally. The continuous flow of labor, reflection, and awareness ensured that both mind and body remained regulated, calm, and attentive. Each small gesture, breath, and motion reinforce the overarching rhythm, allowing the villagers to transition smoothly from day into evening, preserving the quiet, deliberate, and meditative cadence that had defined the entire day. Night arrived gradually, without a clear boundary between the last light of evening and the first shadows of darkness. The sky dimmed in soft layers, colors fading from pale gold to muted blue, and finally to a calm, deep gray. Across the village, lamps began to glow gently, one by one, not to illuminate sharply, but to soften the darkness and maintain continuity. Villagers moved more slowly now, their steps quieter, their gestures smaller. As the rhythm of the day shifted into the measured calm of night, animals settled into familiar routines. Cows lay down in their stalls, breathing steadily. Horses stood quietly, heads lowered, responding to the subtle cues of rest. Hens found their places along wooden beams, feathers rustling softly before stillness returned. These movements were observed with quiet attention, not to ensure balance and comfort. The relationship between villagers and animals remained steady, grounded in routine and familiarity, shaped by long habit rather than instruction. Inside barns and houses, small, deliberate tasks continued. Tools were placed carefully in their proper positions, not for immediate use, but to preserve order for the following day. Floors were swept in slow, methodical motions, each pass of the broom producing a soft, repetitive sound that blended into the quiet. Doors were checked, latches secured, and windows adjusted to allow air to circulate without letting in the cold. Every action was simple, familiar, and unhurried, reinforcing a sense of completion rather than finality. The village itself became quieter, but never silent. The wind moved gently between buildings, carrying faint sounds of trees, distant water, and the occasional call of a nocturnal bird. Footsteps echoed briefly along wooden walkways, then faded. Light from windows spilled softly onto paths and walls, creating small islands of warmth in the surrounding darkness. These visual cues guided movement naturally, allowing villagers to navigate without haste, their bodies responding instinctively to the environment. Meals were prepared and eaten without ceremony. Food was simple, warm, and sustaining, shared in calm silence or with a few quiet words. Utensils moved slowly, plates were handled carefully, and the act of eating became part of the evening's rhythm rather than a separate event. Afterward, dishes were cleaned and stored with the same deliberate attention shown throughout the day, reinforcing continuity and order. Nothing was rushed, and nothing was delayed beyond necessity. As night deepened, observation replaced action. Villagers paused more often, standing by doors or windows, looking out across the fields now softened by darkness. The shapes of fences, trees, and hills were still visible, though less defined, and the absence of sharp detail encouraged the mind to rest. Breathing slowed, movements became minimal, and awareness shifted inward, guided by the steady presence of familiar surroundings. Inside the houses, small sources of light defined space and time. Lamps flickered gently, casting moving shadows across walls and ceilings. The warmth they provided was modest but sufficient, creating an atmosphere of calm containment. People adjusted their posture, settled into chairs or benches, and allowed the body to relax without collapsing into stillness. Hands rested, eyes softened, and attention drifted naturally between the present moment and quiet reflection. The village existed in a state of gentle suspension. Nothing demanded immediate action, yet nothing felt abandoned. Tools were ready, animals were secure, and the environment was stable. This balance allowed the mind to release tension without losing awareness. The rhythm of the day had not ended. It had simply slowed, stretching into longer intervals, allowing each moment to unfold fully before giving way to the next. Outside, the night continued its gradual expansion. Clouds moved slowly across the sky, revealing and concealing stars without pattern or urgency. The air cooled further, encouraging stillness. Sounds became softer, more distant, blending into a continuous background that neither interrupted nor demanded attention. The village rested within this larger rhythm, shaped by forces beyond immediate control, yet deeply familiar. Eventually, movement diminished further. Villagers retired one by one, not in response to a fixed hour, but to a shared sense of completion. Doors closed softly, lamps were dimmed, and the remaining sounds of activity faded into quiet. The village did not fall asleep abruptly. It settled like a body easing into rest, guided by habit, environment, and the steady passage of time. Even in rest, continuity remained. The structures of the village held warmth, animals breathed steadily, and the landscape maintained its quiet presence. Nothing was final, and nothing was urgent. The night became another phase of the same rhythm that had governed the day, offering restoration without interruption. Time moved forward gently, carried by breath. Darkness And the subtle awareness that morning would return in its own unhurried way. The night deepened slowly, without interruption, as the village settled fully into stillness. Darkness no longer arrived in layers, but remained steady, wrapped gently around houses, barns, and open fields. The faint glow from a few remaining lamps softened edges and shadows, but most light had faded, allowing the environment to guide awareness through sound, temperature, and familiar spatial memory. Movement became rare, deliberate, and minimal, as if each gesture required quiet permission from the surrounding calm. Inside the houses, breathing became the dominant rhythm. Slow, steady, and unforced, it replaced the earlier cadence of work and observation. Bodies adjusted naturally, finding positions that required no effort to maintain. Blankets were drawn closer, not hurriedly, but with quiet precision, and small sounds fabric shifting, wood settling. The faint crackle of cooling surfaces merged into the background without distinction. Nothing called for attention. Everything existed as part of a shared, continuous presence. Animals remained calm and settled. In barns, their breathing synchronized loosely with the environment, deep and regular. Occasional movements, sand, ear, twitching, a hoof, adjusting. A soft exhale were brief and unremarkable, reinforcing the sense of safety and routine. These sounds carried faintly through the night air, not as signals, but as reassurance that life continued in its most stable form. No vigilance was required. Familiarity provided comfort. Outside, the landscape held its shape even in darkness. Trees stood motionless or swayed gently in response to light wind. Fields rested, their boundaries remembered rather than seen. Paths remained where they had always been, defined by habit and memory rather than light. The absence of visual detail encouraged a different kind of awareness, one that relied on internal mapping and quiet recognition rather than observation. Time moved without markers. There were no bells, no calls, no changes demanding response. Instead, the night progressed through subtle shifts, the cooling of air, the slow movement of clouds, the changing texture of silence. Each moment felt complete on its own, not leading toward anything, not resolving into an outcome. This lack of direction allowed the mind to rest, releasing the need to anticipate or recall. Within this stillness, thought softened. Ideas did not form clearly or persist long enough to require attention. Memories surfaced briefly, without emotion or narrative, then faded. Awareness drifted between external sensation and internal quiet, neither fully engaged nor absent. The village existed not as a collection of tasks or structures, but as a stable presence holding space for rest without expectation. Occasionally, a sound traveled across the night, a distant movement of water, a branch settling, the call of an unseen bird. But these interruptions were gentle and brief. They did not disrupt the calm. Instead, they reinforced it, reminding the listener that the world remained active even in rest. Each sound arrived, lingered, and dissolved naturally, without demanding interpretation. The rhythm of night differed from that of day, yet remained connected. Where the day had been shaped by motion and observation, the night was defined by stillness and continuity. The same structures that supported labor now supported rest. The same environment that guided attention now allowed it to release. Nothing had changed in essence, only the pace had slowed further, stretching moments into quiet expanses. As hours passed, the village remained suspended in this calm equilibrium. No one watched the clock. No one waited for a signal. Rest unfolded naturally, guided by internal rhythms rather than external demands. The absence of urgency became complete, allowing the body to sink fully into stillness while the mind drifted gently, unanchored by purpose or expectation. The village did not disappear into darkness. It rested within it, intact and unbroken. This stability created a quiet assurance that nothing was required in this moment, that presence alone was sufficient. Eventually, the night reached its deepest point, though no one marked it. The darkness remained consistent, the air cool and still, the environment unchanged. Time continued its passage, but without sensation. The village remained as it was, calm, contained, and at rest, waiting not actively, but passively, for the gradual return of light that would come, as always, in its own unhurried way. The deepest hours of the night unfolded without ceremony, marked not by change, but by continuity. Darkness remained settled over the village, steady and complete, as if the world had paused in a state of gentle balance. No movement signaled the passage of time, yet time continued, flowing quietly beneath the surface of stillness. Houses, barns, and fields remained exactly where they had been, their presence constant, requiring no attention. Inside, sleep existed in layers rather than absolutes. Some villagers rested deeply, breathing slow and even, bodies fully supported by familiar spaces. Others drifted lightly, aware of small sensations, the texture of fabric, the faint coolness of air, the sound of wood settling without reacting to them. These subtle states shifted naturally, without intention or effort, guided by rhythms older than habit. Animals remained settled, their presence steady and reassuring. In the barns, warmth lingered, held by thick walls and the collective stillness of resting bodies. A horse adjusted its stance quietly. A cow exhaled slowly. Straw shifted almost imperceptibly beneath weight. These sounds carried softly into the night, not as signals, but as reminders of continuity. Nothing required correction or response. Everything existed as expected. Outside, the landscape held its shape in darkness. Fields stretched outward, unseen yet familiar, defined by memory rather than sight. Trees stood motionless, their branches occasionally stirred by the lightest wind. The sky remained overcast or clear without distinction, its details irrelevant in the absence of light. The world felt complete, contained within itself, requiring no interaction. The air cooled gradually, though the change was too subtle to notice in a single moment. Temperature shifted across hours, not minutes, encouraging deeper stillness. Walls insulated, blankets warmed, animals conserved energy. These responses were automatic, part of an ongoing equilibrium that required no conscious decision. Silence during these hours was not empty. It held layers of quiet sound, the distant movement of water, the faint whisper of wind, the soft resonance of structures settling into rest. These sounds were not events. They were textures, forming a continuous background that supported rest rather than interrupting it. Awareness, if present at all, drifted across these textures without anchoring. Thought, when it surfaced, did so gently and without direction. There were no narratives, no plans, no recollections demanding attention. Ideas appeared briefly, then dissolved, leaving behind a sense of openness. The mind did not seek resolution or meaning. It remained suspended, content within the absence of demand. The village existed in a state beyond activity and rest, where distinction between the two blurred. Nothing was being prepared, and nothing was being concluded. This middle state allowed for complete release, free from expectation. Even the idea of mourning felt distant, abstract, unnecessary. Time continued to pass, though its movement was imperceptible. There were no markers to indicate progress, only the steady persistence of stillness. Darkness remained consistent, air calm, sounds minimal. The village remained intact, unchanged, held within a quiet continuity that required nothing to sustain it. Gradually, without announcement, the balance began to shift. Not toward motion, but toward readiness. The night did not end. It loosened slightly, allowing the possibility of change to exist without forcing it. This shift was subtle, almost theoretical, sensed rather than observed. In this state, the village rested fully, complete and undisturbed. Structures stood firm, animals remained calm, and the landscape held its quiet form. Nothing was missing, and nothing was approaching urgently. The moment was whole. Eventually, though no one noticed when, the deepest stillness began to ease, not through sound or light, but through the faintest internal adjustment, as if the world had taken a longer breath. The night remained, but it no longer felt absolute. Continuity persisted, carrying the village gently forward, unbroken, toward whatever would come next. The first light did not arrive as an event, but as a gradual softening of darkness. Long before the sun approached the horizon, the night loosened its hold, allowing faint changes to emerge almost unnoticed. The sky shifted from deep black to muted shades of gray, not enough to illuminate forms clearly, but sufficient to suggest their presence. The village remained still, held within this quiet transition, neither fully asleep nor awake. Air moved gently across fields and rooftops, cooler than the day before, carrying the faintest suggestion of change. The ground retained warmth from the previous day, releasing it slowly into the early morning air. Walls, fences, and paths held their familiar shapes, though edges remained blurred, defined more by memory than sight. This hour belonged neither to night nor morning. It existed between calm and unhurried. Animals sensed the shift before any visible change occurred. Breathing patterns adjusted subtly. Bodies shifted slightly within stalls or resting places, and awareness increased without movement. A horse lifted its head briefly, then settled again. A cow adjusted its weight, straw rustling softly. These actions were minimal, instinctive, and unremarkable, part of a rhythm that required no attention. Bodies rested comfortably, responding to changes in temperature and air without waking. Blankets were adjusted unconsciously. Breaths deepened or slowed, and stillness persisted. The village remained in a suspended state, held gently by habit and environment. Without any need to prepare or respond, sound returned gradually, not as noise, but as presence. The distant movement of water became slightly more noticeable. Wind shifted direction, brushing against trees and walls. Somewhere beyond the village, a bird stirred, though its call remained absent. These sounds did not announce morning. They simply existed, filling the quiet without disrupting it. The sky lightened by degrees, too small to measure, allowing the faintest outlines of buildings and trees to emerge. Shadows remained soft, without contrast, blending into the landscape rather than defining it. This lack of sharpness encouraged continued rest, allowing awareness to remain diffuse and unstructured. Time at this hour moved differently. Moments did not accumulate. They stretched. There was no sense of anticipation or direction, only continuity. The village existed exactly as it was, complete in its stillness. Nothing needed to be remembered, and nothing needed to be planned. The presence of light did not demand change. It simply accompanied the ongoing calm. Gradually, the environment prepared itself. Air temperature stabilized, moisture settled on surfaces, and the faint scent of earth became more noticeable. These changes were subtle, registered only if attention happened to rest upon them. Otherwise, they passed quietly, becoming part of the background that supported rest rather than interrupting it. Animals remained calm, neither active nor fully asleep. Their awareness mirrored the environment, responsive but restrained. Movement remained minimal, limited to small adjustments that maintained comfort. The village continued to hold its balance, neither progressing nor retreating, resting within the narrow space between night and morning. Shapes became familiar, distances clearer, though still softened by the absence of direct sunlight. This recognition did not bring urgency. It simply restored context, allowing the village to exist once more as a visible place rather than an imagined one. The transition remained incomplete, intentionally so. Morning had not yet begun, and night had not fully released its presence. This overlap preserved the calm established throughout the night, ensuring that the rhythm of rest was not broken abruptly. The village remained quiet, intact, and steady. In this final moment before dawn, continuity was complete. The night had done its work, providing rest without interruption, and the day waited without impatience. Nothing moved forward too quickly. Nothing lingered unnecessarily. The village existed within this gentle balance, supported by light, air, and time itself. As the first true light approached, still unseen, the village remained at rest, ready but not alert, present but not active. The rhythm established over hours of darkness persisted, carrying forward into the coming day without disruption. The moment passed quietly, smoothly, and without boundary, closing the night and completing the cycle as naturally and gently as it had begun. Morning arrived without declaration, unfolding slowly as the first true light settled across the village and the surrounding fields. The sky brightened gently, shifting from pale gray to a soft, diffused blue, still without sharp contrast or warmth. This light did not interrupt the calm of night. It continued it, stretching the quiet into a new phase rather than replacing it. The village remained still, allowing the transition to occur without urgency or response. Air moved softly between buildings, carrying the cool freshness of early morning. Moisture rested lightly on wooden surfaces, grass, and stone, reflecting the faint light in small, muted highlights. Paths, fences, and rooftops became gradually more visible, though their edges remained softened, inviting observation without focus. Nothing required attention yet. The morning simply existed, present and patient. Inside houses and barns, rest continued in a lighter form. Breathing remained steady, bodies relaxed, and awareness hovered near the surface without rising. Small adjustments occurred naturally. Blankets shifted. Posture changed. A breath deepened each action, guided by instinct rather than thought. The rhythm of night lingered, ensuring that the return of light did not disturb the balance that had formed. Animals responded subtly to the increasing light. A cow lifted its head briefly, then rested again. Horses shifted weight, hooves pressing gently into the ground. Hens remained settled, feathers unmoving. These responses were minimal, not yet signaling activity, only readiness. The environment provided cues, but no demand followed. The village remained suspended between rest and motion. Sound returned gradually, layered and indistinct. The distant murmur of water became slightly clearer. Wind moved leaves with a soft, even cadence, and a single bird called faintly before falling silent again. These sounds did not break the calm. They blended into it, reinforcing continuity. Silence remained dominant, supported by these gentle textures rather than replaced by them. Light continued to spread evenly across the landscape. Shadows remained long and soft, barely distinguishable from the ground beneath them. Colors were muted, reduced to variations of gray, brown, and pale green. This restraint preserved the meditative quality of the moment, allowing awareness to remain diffuse and unstructured. The village did not awaken. It simply became more visible. Time in these early hours moved slowly and without direction. There was no schedule to follow, no task awaiting immediate attention. The day had not yet claimed its shape. This openness allowed the mind to remain at rest, unburdened by anticipation or memory. The village existed fully in this moment, complete without action. Gradually, the air warmed by an almost imperceptible degree. Moisture began to lift from surfaces, though it remained present, clinging gently to grass and wood. These changes occurred quietly, without spectacle. The environment adjusted itself naturally, maintaining balance without intervention. The village continued to respond passively, held within a stable rhythm that required no effort to sustain. Animals remained calm, awareness increasing slightly without movement. Breathing patterns adjusted, posture shifted subtly, and attention sharpened just enough to register light and sound. No animal moved with intent. None initiated activity. The morning had not yet invited motion. The rhythm remained slow, measured, and unbroken. Inside the houses, the stillness persisted. Light filtered through windows, softening shadows and illuminating familiar shapes without clarity. Objects remained where they had been left, waiting without expectation. The presence of light did not prompt action, it simply confirmed continuity. Rest remained intact, protected by the gradual nature of the transition. Outside, the village landscape revealed itself more clearly. Fields extended outward, fences marked familiar boundaries, and trees stood quietly against the lightning sky. The absence of direct sunlight preserved a sense of calm neutrality. Nothing demanded attention, and nothing distracted from rest. The village existed in a balanced state, fully present and yet inactive. As time passed, the possibility of movement began to emerge, not as intention, but as potential. The environment suggested readiness without urgency. Light stabilized, air settled, and sound remained gentle and sparse. This moment belonged entirely to transition, holding space for what would follow without forcing it to arrive. The village remained quiet, composed, and steady. The rhythm established during the night continued, now supported by light rather than darkness. Nothing was lost, and nothing was gained. The cycle moved forward smoothly, carrying rest into the early morning without disruption. In this early phase of the day, continuity was complete. The village rested within itself, prepared for gradual awakening, but not yet engaged. The light, the air, and the landscape worked together to preserve calm, allowing time to pass gently. Morning had arrived, but it had done so softly, leaving the village exactly as it was present, stable, and at ease. The first movements of morning did not arrive all at once. They appeared gradually, scattered and quiet, emerging naturally from the stillness that had carried the village through the night. Light remained soft and indirect, spreading evenly across fields and rooftops without casting sharp shadows. The air held a gentle coolness, balanced, encouraging slow motion rather than urgency. Inside the houses, awareness began to shift. Breathing changed subtly, growing slightly deeper or more regular. Bodies adjusted their position without waking fully, responding instinctively to light, temperature, and familiarity. Hands rested, then shifted, shoulders relaxed. A breath paused briefly before continuing. These movements were small and unremarkable, yet they marked the beginning of transition from rest to presence. Animals were the first to move with intention, though even their actions remained restrained. A horse stepped forward within its stall, hooves pressing softly into straw. A cow lifted its head and turned slightly, listening without seeking sound. Hens adjusted their position along wooden beams, feathers settling quietly. None of these movements signaled activity. They reflected readiness, an awareness of mourning rather than engagement with it. Outside, the village landscape responded to light with subtle clarity. Paths became more defined. Fences stood out against the fields, and the shapes of trees sharpened slightly without becoming vivid. Moisture lingered on grass and wood, reflecting the pale light in muted patterns. The environment offered no instruction, only quiet confirmation that the cycle was continuing. Sound returned slowly, layered and distant. The murmur of water became clearer. Wind moved leaves with a steady rhythm. And somewhere beyond the village, a bird called once briefly before silence returned. These sounds did not interrupt rest. They settled into it, reinforcing continuity rather than change. As time passed, a few villagers stirred more fully. Eyes opened briefly, then closed again. Awareness rose and fell without direction. There was no rush to begin the day, no expectation of immediate action. Morning remained gentle, allowing the mind to remain unstructured and calm. The village existed in a state of readiness without demand. Eventually, movement extended beyond rest. Someone sat up slowly, pausing before standing. Another adjusted clothing, not yet leaving the warmth of familiar space. Doors remained closed. Lamps stayed unlit. The presence of light was sufficient, guiding motion without instruction. Each action unfolded at its own pace, disconnected from schedules or urgency. Animals began to respond more noticeably to the environment. Breathing remained steady, but posture shifted toward alertness. A horse turned its head toward the open space of the barn. A cow stood, stretching briefly before settling again. These actions were deliberate yet unhurried, guided by instinct rather than expectation. The village remained quiet. No tools were lifted, no tasks initiated. The early morning held space for gradual alignment between body, environment, and time. Movement occurred only where necessary, and even then, it remained slow and deliberate. This restraint preserved the calm established during the night, ensuring continuity rather than disruption. Light continued to strengthen, though it remained diffused. Shadows softened further, blending into the ground rather than defining it. Colors emerged, gently faded greens, weathered wood, muted stone, without intensity. This softness supported awareness without demanding focus, allowing the mind to remain open and relaxed. Inside the houses, small routines began to form. A cup was placed on a table. A window was opened slightly to allow fresh air inside. Footsteps moved quietly across wooden floors, careful not to disturb the surrounding stillness. Each action was simple, familiar, and unremarkable, reinforcing the sense that morning was not an event, but a continuation. Outside, animals responded calmly to these changes. The sound of movement did not startle them. It was expected, familiar. The relationship between villagers and animals remained steady, shaped by long habit and mutual recognition rather than command. Observation guided action, ensuring balance rather than efficiency. As the first true movements of the day took shape, the village maintained its slow rhythm. Nothing accelerated. The pace remained even, deliberate and calm. Tasks had not yet begun in earnest, and rest had not fully released its hold. This balance allowed the transition to remain gentle, preserving the meditative quality of the early morning. Time continued to pass quietly. There were no signals marking progress, only the gradual alignment of light, sound, and movement. The village did not awaken suddenly. It emerged slowly, one small motion at a time. Each step, each breath, each shift in posture contributed to the unfolding rhythm. The morning held its shape carefully. It allowed presence without pressure, movement without urgency, and awareness without demand. The village responded naturally, guided by environment rather than intention. This slow beginning ensured continuity, carrying the calm of night forward into the coming day without disruption. As the light stabilized and the air warmed slightly, the village reached a new equilibrium. Rest had softened, motion had begun, and awareness had expanded gently. Nothing was complete, and nothing was rushed. The first movements of morning settled into place, forming the foundation for the day ahead, steady, quiet, and unhurried. The air carried a mild freshness, steady and unobtrusive. Inside the houses, the first routines took shape slowly. A kettle was placed on a stove without urgency, its presence more symbolic than functional at first. A chair was moved slightly closer to a table. Curtains were adjusted just enough to allow light in while maintaining privacy. These motions were unremarkable, practiced over many years, requiring little thought or attention. Awareness stayed close to the present moment, guided by sensation rather than expectation. The warmth of a cup held between hands, the texture of wood beneath fingertips, the faint sound of water heating, each detail existed independently, without forming a narrative. Outside, animals responded calmly to the signs of routine. Barn doors were opened partway, allowing light and air to move freely. Animals did not rush forward. They remained where they were, observing quietly. Footsteps crossed familiar paths between buildings. Boots pressed into soft earth, leaving impressions that would fade by midday. Fences were checked briefly, not repaired, simply acknowledged. Gates were opened slowly and left resting against their hinges. Sound expanded slightly, but remained contained. The low murmur of voices appeared briefly, then faded. A bucket touched the ground with a soft, controlled sound. Wood shifted as a door settled into place. None of these sounds dominated. They blended together, forming a quiet morning texture that supported awareness without drawing focus. Trees stood defined, but calm, their leaves moving gently with the air. Animals began to move more freely as routines progressed. A horse stepped into the open, standing still before moving again. A cow followed a familiar path, guided by memory rather than direction. Birds shifted along fences and rooftops, observing without urgency. Each movement contributed to the unfolding morning without accelerating it. The village maintained its quiet balance. No one hurried ahead of the rhythm. There was no sense of falling behind or catching up. Morning existed as a shared state rather than a schedule. This allowed routines to remain gentle, preserving the calm carried over from night. Inside the houses, warmth gathered slowly. Steam rose from cups and settled back into the air. Chairs were pulled out, then left untouched for a moment. Windows remained open just enough to keep the air fresh without cooling the space too much. The environment adjusted naturally, responding to use rather than instruction. As routines repeated across the village, a collective rhythm emerged, not synchronized, but aligned. The early morning held space for pauses. Movements stopped briefly, resumed, then paused again. Hands rested, eyes observed, breaths deepened. These pauses were not interruptions. They were part of the routine itself, allowing the body and mind to remain grounded. Sound continued to grow gradually, though it remained soft. A distant tool made contact with wood once, then fell silent. A voice carried briefly across open space, then dissolved. Animals settled into their own early routines. Feeding began slowly, movements controlled and familiar. There was no competition, no tension. Each animal followed its place within the environment, guided by habit and comfort. The balance between humans and animals remained steady, shaped by mutual familiarity. As early morning routines continued, the village reached a stable rhythm. The transition felt complete without feeling final, allowing the day to unfold naturally from this foundation. Time passed without measurement. There were no markers indicating progress, only the quiet accumulation of small actions. Each routine reinforced continuity, ensuring that the calm of early morning remained intact. By the end of this phase, the village existed fully within the day while preserving the stillness of night. Early routines had taken their place gently, preparing the environment for whatever would come next without forcing change. The rhythm remained slow, steady, and open, carrying the village forward in a state of quiet readiness. Morning did not arrive as something new. It simply continued, slowly filling the spaces that were already awake. The light had settled into a steady presence, no longer changing with each passing minute. It rested gently across rooftops, along paths, and over the open fields, creating a sense of quiet familiarity rather than brightness. The village moved within this light without reacting to it. People continued what they had already begun, not because it was time to do so, but because the rhythm felt natural. Steps followed familiar ground, unhurried and even. Movements were neither careful nor rushed, guided more by habit than by thought. Inside the houses, the morning felt established. Air moved softly through open windows, carrying a mild freshness that no longer felt new. Objects remained where they had been placed earlier. Cups on tables, cloths folded, doors resting open just enough. Nothing needed adjustment. Spaces felt complete in their current state. Outside, animals moved with quiet certainty. Feeding continued at a calm pace, bodies shifting slowly, heads lifting and lowering without urgency. There was no sign of impatience or alertness, only a steady engagement with the present moment. Each movement followed a pattern shaped by repetition rather than intention. Sound existed as a low, continuous layer. Footsteps passed along paths. Wood touched wood. Metal met stone once or twice, then fell silent again. Voices appeared briefly, soft and unremarkable, before dissolving back into the background. No single sound stood out. Together, they formed a gentle texture that supported the morning. Without defining it, the landscape held steady. Fields lay open and quiet, their edges softened by distance. Trees stood still, leaves shifting only slightly with the air. The sky offered light without drama, its presence constant and reassuring. Nothing in the environment suggested change or anticipation. As the morning settled further, movement became less deliberate. Tasks continued, but they no longer felt like beginnings. A path was crossed again. A container was lifted and set down. A door was opened and left that way. These actions blended into one another, forming a flow that required no attention. There were moments when nothing happened at all. A person paused without realizing it. An animal stood still, neither resting nor moving forward. These pauses did not interrupt the rhythm. They belonged to it, allowing the pace to remain slow and grounded. Inside, warmth balanced naturally with the air from outside. Cups were held, then forgotten for a time. Chairs were occupied briefly, then left empty again. Light moved across floors and walls without drawing the eye. The interior spaces felt lived in without feeling active. Outside, the village maintained its quiet coherence. No one moved faster than necessary. No sound grew louder than the rest. Morning did not build toward anything. It simply continued, stable and even. The calm, established earlier, remained intact, carried forward without effort. Animals settled into familiar positions. Feeding slowed. Movement became minimal. They remained present, aware of their surroundings without reacting to them. Their calm reinforced the overall stillness, grounding the village in a shared rhythm. Time passed unnoticed. There were no clear markers separating one moment from the next. Light remained consistent, sound unchanged, movement steady. The morning existed as a continuous state rather than a sequence of events. The village did not feel busy, nor did it feel quiet in the sense of emptiness. It felt balanced. Activity and stillness coexisted naturally, neither overpowering the other. This balance allowed the environment to feel complete without resolution. As awareness settled, there was no sense of preparing for what would come later. The present moment felt sufficient. The village existed fully within it, supported by familiarity and repetition rather than intention. Nothing shifted suddenly. No new sounds emerged. No movements signaled a transition. Morning had already settled in, quietly and without ceremony, and the village remained within it, steady and unhurried, continuing forward in the same calm rhythm. As the day continues quietly beyond this moment, there is no need to follow it any further. The village remains steady, held within its familiar rhythm, moving forward without urgency or demand. Everything that needed to begin has already begun, and everything that will continue can do so without attention. The light now rests evenly across the landscape, unchanged and unremarkable. Paths remain where they have always been. Houses stand quietly, filled with ordinary presence. Fields stretch outward, calm and unbroken, requiring nothing in return. The environment holds itself together naturally, without effort or instruction. Movement carries on gently. Somewhere, footsteps pass along a familiar route. Somewhere else, an animal shifts its weight and settles again. These actions do not signal progress or purpose. They simply exist, steady and complete in themselves. There is no story unfolding that needs to be remembered. No detail requires focus. No moment needs to be held onto. The village continues, as it always has, supported by repetition and calm rather than change. As awareness softens, it becomes easier to let go of listening. Words no longer need to form meaning. Sounds can pass by without being noticed. The mind does not need to follow or interpret anything that comes next. Breathing remains slow and natural, rising and falling on its own rhythm. The present moment is enough, and it does not require attention. The village will remain here, steady and unchanged, long after this narration fades. Morning will continue into the day, just as night once carried it here. Everything moves forward quietly, without announcement. You do not need to stay with these images. You do not need to imagine what happens next. The rhythm has already been established, and it will continue without you. Sounds soften further now, blending into the background. Silence becomes wider, more comfortable. The village does not stop, and neither does time. It all continues gently, beyond words, beyond attention.